And now, to introduce our very special guest speaker, please welcome Ken Grossman, owner, Executive Image Custom Clothiers. Ken, thanks.
Thank you, Tony. My first announcement is I cannot speak as fast as Barbara, but I'm going to try to get this done in 2 minutes. But I would be remiss if I didn't thank Teresa Rady, Terry McWilliams with the FEI for making this happen today. This was a lot of work to pull all this together. I also want to introduce, I'm calling it the Berman family table. My cousin Margie Kahn says, well, this is like a Berman family picnic today. So I want to introduce, many of you probably know Harris Berman, Dennis's father, very prominent attorney in town, and Harris and I met about 3 years ago at Vincenzo's over lunch, and we talked about the opportunity to have Dennis come speak, and I've been working on it pretty hard for 3 years, so thank you, Harris, for making this happen. Also, the only reason this happened is our family is celebrating a wedding this weekend. Dennis's aunt and uncle, Margie and Bob Kahn, have a granddaughter getting married. So it's the only way I could get somebody, the financial editor of the Wall Street Journal, to come down on a Thursday afternoon for lunch with all of us. I'm sorry. And lastly, I just have to introduce my dad. He's only 88 years old, and he had to be here today. So my dad's at the Berman family table. And my son Jack is trying to follow Dennis in his passion. He's a sophomore at the IU Media School in sports media, and someday he'll be up here speaking to you guys. I think he's off to a strong start. And Phil, I'm not even going to introduce you, my brother. So I'm honored to introduce Dennis K. Berman, the financial editor of the Wall Street Journal. So I ask, how does a kid from Louisville's Atherton High School become the financial editor of the Wall Street Journal? I might have the answer. It takes hard work, a penchant for learning, great character, perhaps a break or two along the way. So reading was a cherished value in the Berman household. Dennis' father, Harris, and his mom, Sandy, made it a priority. So Harris tells me Dennis read a lot. Matter of fact, when the family got the World Book encyclopedias, Dennis read it from cover to cover. I mean, really, Dennis, who does that? So Harris and Sandy instilled a strong commitment, along with reading, Harris and Sandy instilled a strong commitment to Jewish values and ethics. Dennis' father, Harris, practiced law with the legendary Frank Haddad. Harris had a plan for Dennis to someday join his law practice. Dennis had other ideas. He knew journalism was his calling. Dennis graciously told his dad, practicing law was a backup plan, and in fact, Dad, not really a very good one. Dennis attended Pennsylvania University, where he graduated magna cum laude with a BA in history. Remarkably enough, Dennis never took a business course at Penn. At the Journal, Dennis started as a reporter and continues to write a column called The Game. He shares in the 2003 Pulitzer Prize, has won 2 prestigious Gerald Loeb Awards for excellence in business journalism, currently serves as a media fellow at the Hoover Institute. Dennis is a regular contributor on CNBC and the CBS Morning Show with Charlie Rose. And I'm not even getting started because I'm not going on with the rest. Dennis told me not to. You're going to enjoy our presentation today. Dennis will explain what is happening in our economy and why so many Americans are not feeling the positive changes. Dennis will tell us how we got here and where we're going with a presentation he calls The Future in 29 enlightening, scary, and provocative charts. Dennis will also take us inside the Journal's morning meeting where editors and reporters debate what's happening in financial markets around the world. Please join me in giving a warm Rotary Club of Louisville welcome to today's speaker, Dennis K. Berman.
Thank you, Ken. I've never had such a build-up to a speech ever, so the pressure's on. I think the best thing I've done recently is wear a suit and tie in Louisville in August, which is probably the hardest thing. I forgot how hard it is. You guys who are wearing suits and ties, you're warriors. Warriors. It's really hot out there. So we have about 25 minutes. I cannot speak as fast as Barbara, wherever she is, but Barbara, you are amazing. but we will try, I hope, to talk about a few things that we discuss, debate, mull over, and just they're center of sort of our lives at the Wall Street Journal as we try to think about what's happening in the economy and the markets. So let's start at the beginning. Now, it's important to see these charts. If you cannot see these charts, I would encourage you maybe to come up here. You can loiter on the walls. You can come up. You can rush the stage if you really want to. But when we get started, okay. A world deeply in debt. It's kind of hard to see this, but the only important thing is it's going up. These are the central bank balances of the biggest central banks in the world. We have to remember, as much as things seem quote-unquote normal in the world today, they're not that normal. Look at the balance sheets that have been expanding largely since the financial crisis. If you look here, now I'm going to go down here, right around there, that's the financial crisis of almost 10 years ago. Really started about 10 years ago in August 2007. Really reached its crescendo moment at Lehman Brothers 2008. But we're now over approaching $15 trillion of central bank assets, buying bonds, in some cases actually buying stocks. The Fed, the BOE, the Bank of Japan, the Swiss National Bank, all of them putting money on their balance sheets, assets on their balance sheets. This is a world at a sovereign level, a country level, deeply in debt. We cannot forget that we are in perhaps the greatest monetary experiment ever, and we're living at it. We're living through it right now. These are charts pulled from various places. I don't believe this one is in the journal. This came from someplace else. But wow, look what's happening in the U.S. That's pretty interesting. Federal net debt. There's some specifics to some of the stuff, but the most important thing again is to look at this line. What's happening in America? Net debt. It's going up. 2027, we're almost at about 90% of yearly GDP. Now you'd say, well, we got through World War II just fine. We went over 100%. Of course, the economy in the world in a post-war context versus the context of 2017 is vastly, vastly different. Post-war world, the world was destroyed and America rebuilt it and enjoyed the spoils of that rebuilding. 2017, it's a much more competitive world. How do we change that dynamic? Now, this is just a forecast, and there are ways in which it can improve. But we cannot forget this hanging over our economy as we approach the next decade of the 2020s. Now, this one's really hard for y'all to see. But I love this chart. And here's why I love this chart, is because this shows for every dollar that you pay in taxes, and you guys, I'm sure, pay a lot of taxes, for every dollar you pay in taxes, where that money goes. And this is the difference in the last 5 years, 2011 versus 2016. What do we see? For every dollar you pay, the amount that goes to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid is up dramatically. Veterans payments as well up. A lot of people sent to Afghanistan and Iraq, we're paying for their well-being as we should. Civilian federal retirement up 11% in just 5 years. What's going down? Transportation, food stamps, justice, housing assistance, foreign aid, and international. So what's happening out there? We are putting a vast amount of our country's resources into paying for Social Security and health care. That's a demographic issue. And here you can see this in a different context. Here's the federal budget projection of 2016 versus the federal budget projection of 2046. Look at that interest expense going up from 6% of our current budget to 21% of the budget by 2046. All other spending is that gray, nice big half of a pie there, 45% today. Again, these are just projections, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. But by 2046, you're at 26%. We're kind of running out of money to do other things, and that's kind of important and kind of serious. Now, if you guys have heard about the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which was a bipartisan group to try to address this, they came up with a lot of ideas. They were heard in Washington, and and nothing happened. Let's try to take it to a little more down-to-earth level for each of us. Perhaps you work at a company, perhaps you get health care provided by that company. What's happening there? Again, this is one estimate here. Your premiums and healthcare costs, or sorry, annual medical costs for average family of four has gone up from $9,000. This is inflation-adjusted dollars, $9,000 in 2002 to about $26,000 in 2016. So yeah, people are upset. They are wages might be growing slightly, but costs are increasing. If you look at education costs, higher education costs, for years and years and years have been well exceeding the cost of inflation in this country. So these are big numbers and big changes. And why are people upset? It's numbers like this, because not only does it feel like there's not enough money to go around, it's actually kind of true, at least when it comes to healthcare costs. You guys are so serious. These are kind of serious charts, aren't they? Well, they're going to keep getting serious, but I think it's important, and I love charts because they just help enlighten you in just like a very simple way. Here is the line that's moving, and here is the direction in which it's moving. And how do we think about it? How do we choose to address it? How do we change it? And maybe I'll get a laugh or two out of you before the presentation's over. We're only on chart 5. Okay. This is a depressing one, too. This is from the New York Times, from one of my old colleagues, David Leonhardt. This is an important one. Basically, it says, 30 years ago, the poorer you were, the more likely you were to have income growth. Today, sorry, in 1980, so that's 37 years ago. Today, in 2014, the growth is pretty much astronomical at the 99.99 ninth percentile. It's a country that's changing. People talk about the lost middle class. Sometimes they exaggerate it, but at least if you believe the figures here in this chart, it does show that the people at the lowest end are getting far less ahead than they used to 37 years ago, a generation or two ago, and this has impacts for the country overall too. So what are we going to do about it? If you ask the people, what do you want to do? Should the government take control of this? Should the government not? Who's in charge? What do you want? And the fascinating thing is no one has any clue. No one has any clue. I mean, look at this. In 1995, 60% of Americans said government's got to stay out. We can do it on our own. Now, 1995, the late 1990s were a great, prosperous time for America, and perhaps that's why they felt the way they did. 2017, it's basically flipped. 57% of Americans say government should do more to help solve some of these problems I've just described, whereas 39%. But look at those numbers crossing between 2008, 2009, 2012. The thing I take away from this chart is no one really knows. The electorate doesn't quite have a clear view, at least for now, for some brief period whenever this poll was taken, I believe in April of this year. The basic answer was we got to have government do more for us. Okay, so not all bad. How do we get out of some of this? Well, we got to grow the economy. And here, the numbers are not great, but they're not terrible. As we know, the unemployment rate in this country has dropped significantly. We are seeing some wage growth improve. We're seeing business confidence improve. If we can grow the economy faster than we are today, some people in Washington say we can get it to 4%, which is an aggressive sum. Some people say 3%, which is perhaps possible. Probably somewhere around 2-ish is the more likely. That's the consensus among economists. Not terrible. Better than a lot of countries around the world, but not great. Probably not enough to grow us out of the problems I was just describing in slides 1 through 7. But at least for this year in 2017, not bad, 2.6%. We could do worse. So I think that counts somewhat as good news for this presentation, and you guys might get a laugh out of that or not. Okay, are you willing to spend more? I don't know. Can we take a show of hands? Are you willing to spend more in August 2017 than you were in, say, August 2016? Who wants to? Just whatever. I don't know, you can buy a car, go to the movies, hot tub, I don't know. All right, we got one hand. All right, we got 3 hands. So these are some of the most successful people in Louisville, and we have 3 of you who feel confident enough to spend more than they did a year ago. That's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. I mean, and you guys are optimists by nature. You're at a Rotary Club meeting, for God's sake. All right. At least by this measure, confidence has really improved, and that's a positive. I guess they missed the Louisville sample size when they made those calls. What about this from the company side? This is a lot of financial mumbo-jumbo here. Basically, companies have been spending their money buying back stock and paying dividends and not investing in plant, property, equipment, people, software, and the like. For this economy to really improve, we need to get that last line up. People who run big companies are just like you all. They don't feel confident enough to spend in 2017 the way they did in 2016. And so they're just giving the money back. It's like, shareholders, I can't do anything with this money. You all just take it. Just take it. And then you guys are getting it and then apparently putting it in the bank, which is not good. But CapEx there is not been positive. But don't underestimate hope. This is the NFIB. I'm sure some of you are small business owners. This is the NFIB's optimism index. Okay, not bad, not bad. Don't underestimate hope, as I like to say. Which gets us to taxes. A lot of talk about tax reform. I don't know whether it's going to happen. I don't think anyone can predict. But this is probably not going to hold forever. It's really small writing. I'm sorry. But basically, all you need to know is that tiny red line you see that says United States, basically the highest corporate tax rate absent Colombia in the world. So is that going to hold? Probably not. Probably not. And yet, this is a survey done earlier in the spring. For those of you guys who follow that kind of stuff, would you say that tax reform is going to happen in 2017? Can we get a show of hands in there? Anyone? 3. The same 3 people. See? There you go. The same 3. That's why they want to spend. Okay. Go with these guys. Maybe they're right. I don't know. I have no idea what's going to happen on this. It is, I think after the Labor Day holiday ends, we'll hear a lot more about tax reform. But where it goes, I don't know. Corporate earnings have been pretty good. Not great, but the dollar's weakened, and that has helped a lot of U.S. companies that export their goods and services around the world. And so from a globalization standpoint, the weaker dollar helps a lot of U.S. corporate earnings. Okay. Now, as you know, I'm from Louisville. I care about this state. I care about this city. And I did a little work on Kentucky. I'm sure some of you guys are intimate with some of these numbers. But let's talk about Kentucky for a moment. I got to tell you, it's not good. It's not good. Percentage of state revenue from federal funds. It's very interesting, some here. Kentucky's the orange line. Now, a lot of that, I think, is because of the ACA, healthcare, Obamacare, if you want to call it that. But the 50-state average is right around there, 30-something%. Kentucky, it's about 40. So I think that shows kind of a weakness in the tax base and a dependence on federal funds in lots of different ways here in Kentucky. Growth rate in state personal income through Q4 2016, adjusted for inflation. In other words, what are you bringing home? Kentucky, Indiana, Tennessee. That green line, growth rate over the past year, not so great. Indiana's been doing pretty well. Tennessee, not bad. The income growth here in the state is not perhaps what it should be. So you guys need to start spending some more. This is the most depressing of all, and I know you guys probably are more current on what's going on with the state pension fund and those obligations. But I looked this up, and it's not good. And I'm in charge of overseeing our pension coverage, and so I know a little bit about the Illinois pension crisis and a little bit about the Connecticut pension crisis and Puerto Rico and Hartford, Connecticut, and on and on and on. But man, this is not good, and I cannot understand, and maybe someone here wants to get up and tell me how this state deals with this problem without either one, raising taxes, or two, cutting benefits for the people in that pension plan. Does anyone, you got a lot of pension? Okay, FEI is here on the case. You want to go ahead?
The crisis arose because in 2000, the system was overfunded, and the legislature increased benefits and stopped putting money in.
That'll do it.
Now, in terms of solving it, Kentucky, studies were done on this initially in 2008. Kentucky has the most rigid constitutional guarantees for current employees of any state in the union. Essentially, not only benefits earned today, but projected benefits for current employees cannot be reduced. The only solution is to put more money.
Okay, that's probably money out of your pocket, so you're probably wise not to have spent that money because you are going to be paying that gap. $37 billion to $82 billion of underfunded pensions. Man, that's not good. So I think it's really important that people here really try to focus on growth of the state economy because that will help fill that gap in a really significant way. And I probably spend a large percentage of my disposable income on purchases via Amazon. And every one of them is coming through Shepherdsville, Kentucky, and I'm like, yes, good, that's good. A few cents, a few dollars here, there, going through Shepherdsville. But I think really focusing on making Louisville really that hub for e-commerce and the retail of the future is a great opportunity, and I really look forward to see what this city and the state can do in that regard, because it is a real opportunity, and I really appreciate those packages from Shepherdsville. Okay, we're not going to end totally depressing, but we have to go through a little bit of a down moment here. There's a bigger thing going on out here. Okay, that's automation in jobs, automation in even knowledge worker jobs, whether it be lawyers, accountants, bankers, asset managers. Can computers take over these tasks? Okay, this is one estimate here. A percentage of jobs at risk of automation by early 2030s. What is that? That's 15 years from now? By this estimate, 38% of U.S. jobs are at risk. Probably gonna do mine too. So that is somewhat of a chilling stat. Let's say that number is 1/3 of that sum. This is just an estimate. Who the heck knows? But let's say that's 13 or 15%. That's still a huge percentage of jobs. So in my mind, there are all these past things that are happening, trying to make up for the debts we've accumulated and the debts we have to pay. And then there's this force here coming, which is automation, which might have some other impact on the world. I met this fellow. This is not a chart, I apologize. But it's a quote. This guy is probably the best funded venture capitalist, the best venture capital backed artificial intelligence entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. And I met him and he said this to me, what's my goal? My goal is to make labor as cheap as electricity. Wow. So his example was stocking shelves in the supermarket. Think about when you're in Kroger late at night and you see all those people hauling those pallets out and putting those cans up on the shelves, like the people getting wages. His goal is to have that be completely automated. And it will happen one day. Again, to make labor as cheap as electricity. Now, there's a creative element to that. Once that's possible, you can do lots of really fascinating, interesting things. My fear is that the people who drive the trucks, there are 5 million commercial driver license holders in the United States, people who stock the shelves, people who draw up the contracts, people who do all kinds of work, they're going to face that reality. Okay, so this last chart. This doesn't end on a hopeless note. The robots haven't won yet. This was from a piece my colleague did, Greg Epp, really fascinating piece saying, oh, what happens when automation comes? And he looked at spreadsheet software, Excel, VisitCalc, if you recall, those computerized programs that automated a lot of the bookkeeping functions of companies. And I love this chart because it shows what happens to the number of bookkeepers, accounting, and auditing clerks drops somewhat precipitously, but management analysts and financial managers, accountants and auditors, those sums go up. So there was an unleashing of creativity. Like once we have the numbers in our hands, we can do a lot more creative and substantive work with it. And so in my mind, this is a hopeful chart for us as we confront an uncertain future, which is that it's easy to be cowed by, oh, the machines are coming or the budget deficit is coming for us. But there really is a font of creativity and opportunity embedded in these technologies that allows the creation of new things and new ideas, new companies, and perhaps a new future. So there are a lot of challenges that start from that chart number 1, a world deeply in debt, to here. The robots haven't won yet. But I think in a hopeful and optimistic place like this here at Rotary, that people here can think about ways to harness that in a good way that passes the 4-way test for the country and the world at large. So there's 20 charts. I hope that lived up to your billing. And if you guys have any questions, I am happy to take them on.
The microphones are open for questions. I had one. It was slide number 11, and you sort of ended on this theme. Don't underestimate hope.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Well, from what we read and what we see at the Journal, there is an optimistic view from a lot of business people, a lot of small business people, that perhaps the regulatory climate has changed and they have more of an opportunity to sort of operate business without too many encumbrances. So I think the hope is there. I don't know if it's been proven out yet, but if you view the stock market as the arbiter of the world's good, which may or may not be, if you view the stock market as some measure of that, then I think that is bearing out. But I wouldn't take the stock market at face value always either.
Thank you. Questions?
Tracy Holliday. One of those last charts was the automation chart. Have y'all correlated that against the baby boomers retiring? Because there's a lot of us not going to be in the job market in 10 or 15 years.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I thought about when putting these slides together was how we have, if you want to talk about conflict in the U.S., the conflict in a way is the conflict between the older generation and the younger generation, whereas the younger generation is paying a larger proportion of its earnings to subsidize the older generation. So, you know, and the population growth in this country is good, but not great, not sufficient enough to sort of change the dynamics of it. So one could make the argument that the automation will actually be a helpful thing to fill some of those holes as we move to an older society overall. But one thing I also like to think about is Japan. Japan, I think this number is right. I think by 2040 there will be 25% fewer Japanese. So just imagine this room and pick out 1 out of every 4 of you. There's just many fewer people, and that proposes all sorts of conundrums for the Japanese society. So if you want to be hopeful about it, I think there is a case to be made.
Well, I guess the problem is robots don't pay taxes.
They don't. They don't. But that was also the chart I had from the New York Times chart. The title of it was, in the future, there are 2 types of people. And the old line in Silicon Valley is there are 2 types of people. 1, the people who program the machines, and 2, the people who are programmed by them.
Thank you very much for coming and getting your extended family here as well. You touched on this in a couple of the last charts about automation and so forth, and you also mentioned that you get a lot from the Amazon warehouse in Shepherdsville. I recently heard that the reason our inflation isn't going up the way it should be is because of companies like Amazon and Uber and all these other companies that are changing the whole way we do things here and making it cheaper to take a cab someplace, you take an Uber instead, or to get a package package the next day from Amazon, which is pretty amazing. Is there a way to do a chart that shows how that's tearing the economy up and then rebuilding it into a different economy?
That's a really good idea. Maybe you should come work with us, because I haven't figured that one out. But it is a certain paradox in some of this material, which is, I talk about how growth is so important to the country at large, to Kentucky in particular. And how does growth happen? Well, in part, productivity. And that productivity, in some cases, a lot of cases, is about replacing inefficiencies with efficiencies. So how we balance the creation of software-enhanced productivity with putting people to work, to your earlier statement, is one of the bigger questions. And we don't manage this economy from the top down like the Chinese do. So I reckon it's going to be a pretty bumpy ride over the next 20 to 30 years as we deal with that. But to grow, we have to be more efficient, and Uber and Amazon are more efficient. So that is a positive, to your point.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Councilwoman Angela Leet. I'm a Rotarian, and I almost can talk as fast as Barbara, so I have two really quick questions. I think they have two quick answers. On slide 4, you presented kind of the redistribution of GDP or federal spending projections, and
Yes.
the interest rate increased by maybe 4 or 5-fold. I can't read my numbers.
Right.
It's a little too dark. But if you look at the interest rate payment expansion, do you believe this will redistribute the world wealth?
Well, one thing that's beautiful about low interest rates is that we can borrow really cheaply right now in the U.S. A 10-year Treasury bond is about I've not checked today, but 2.2%. That's really cheap money for the U.S. to issue. So in some ways, I think that projection might be overstated. But are we redistributing the world's wealth? Yeah. I mean, look at the largest owners of U.S. Treasury securities. It used to be Japan. Do you all know who the largest owner is now? China, then Japan, then maybe the ECB, I'm not sure. But, I mean, yes, we are redistributing, and to the extent that a larger portion of our budget is going to be taken up by debt service.
To other countries?
Yeah.
Okay, and then the other question was on slide 18, and you show
You
the
took
different...
notes, wow, okay.
Okay, well...
You're serious?
Well, I'm an engineer, so
Okay.
I'm a numbers person, so sorry you're getting the questions. You show the different, the labor and the U.S. labor market versus, I think you showed Japan at the bottom. And I wrote,
Can we go back?
and it says the percentage
Hold on, number
of-
18?
Yeah, thank you, that helps.
Okay, yeah.
The percentage of jobs at high risk, and you show that we're at the top and Japan is at the bottom. And is that driven by wages, or is that driven by the type of jobs they're carrying?
The honest answer is I don't know.
Okay. What should we look at to try and, because that's a huge, significant difference.
This is all guessing game stuff, okay? This is just meant to be a provocation. But as I said, if it's just a third of it, that's still a deeply significant number. And if you want to go back and look at the source, you can look at sort of how they categorize what they think things that will be automated. And so you got to put driving top among there, warehouse work top among there, retail, working in restaurants, certainly industrial is probably very near the top of that list. There was a lot of discussion politically about adding manufacturing jobs. Well, for the most part, those are going to robots anyway.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Leland, Ken, lightning round questions, please.
Okay, right. Thanks for coming and for reminding us that why economics is called the dismal science. I'm Leland
Yes.
Woodmansey. I had a question about your ranking of corporate tax rates in the world.
Yes.
The U.S. is number 2. If you reordered that chart based on dollars that corporations actually pay per PE ratio, per profits, per capitalization, or some standardizing figure,
Right.
would the United States still be number 2? Or
That's a good question. Probably not, because at least for multinationals, they pay the real rate they pay is going to be a lot lower than that. And usually the bigger they get, the more multinational they are, which means the more tax beneficial strategies they can employ. So who bears the real cost of this tax rate? It's largely domestically focused businesses, and then smaller to mid-sized businesses here in the U.S. because there's no way around. They can't. If you own a 500-person company in Louisville, you can't route your intellectual property through Ireland probably for the most part. So the larger they are, as a general rule, not a specific one, as a general rule, it probably does come down. So that's how I see it.
Ken?
I don't have a question about any of your charts. I understand them all. My brother tells me there's a simple answer to your economic question. Just spend more money, buy more suits and nice clothes and things. My real question is...
You look great, by the way.
I'll buy you another lunch. My real question is, tell us a little bit about working at the Wall Street Journal. I know you manage 250 employees, and, what's it like working in the big city and, being on CNBC, and Charlie Rose is your good friend, and,
It's not as dramatic as it sounds. Let me tell you that. But the thing that's fun about working at the Journal is that we really just, as I like to put it, we're on an intellectual journey and we're trying to understand answers to questions. And questions around markets and economics are some of the most difficult and yet most important ones to figure out. So we try to be as rigorous as we can about our work and talking to people in the field who have businesses, have interests, or playing in the markets and understand what they're doing. And so, I don't know, maybe nothing as you live it is dramatic as it seems from the outside, but we're just trying to get to some answers the best we can. And the band is already warming up, which means that probably is my cue.
We'll take one final question.
You mentioned earlier, I'm not asking for stock market prediction, that you felt that tax reform is very iffy, very iffy. What is the Wall Street Journal's general conception of the stock market, which has built in this tax increase? There's no tax decrease, no question.
Yeah.
What is their general view of what will happen to the market if tax reform fails?
Well, I think I've qualified my remark a little bit, which is I think I meant to say that tax reform in 2017 is probably iffy. It's already August, basically September. So I think that's going to be a stretch for 2017. I think we wrestle with that very question. Corporate earnings have been pretty good. So just on an earnings alone basis, there is some reason if you keep multiples constant and you say that earnings are increasing, then there is reason for the market to be up on that basis. But I think if say the same way the ACA reform died, and let's say there's some big moment where tax reform is unable to be produced by Congress, I think the popular consensus is it's a negative for the market, because if you're a big multinational, you were paying whatever that sum is, some variation of it, and now you're going to be stuck paying it. So I'm with you. I just don't know what's going to happen.
Dennis K. Berman.
Thank you.